Bryce Duskett here on the Rural Radio Network, and joining us to discuss some latest news coming out of Washington, D.C. is the president of the Nebraska Corn Growers Association. That is Chris Grams. Chris, appreciate your time as always. And today we're talking about sustainable aviation fuel and some modeling that the Nebraska Corn Growers Association is a bit upset about. Size up the situation here.
Yeah, we're very, very frustrated with the report that come out from the Treasury for the SAF, the Sustainable Aviation Fuel, saying that we need to adopt a mandatory no-till, cover crops, and cut down on our fertilizer use efficiency. So it was very devastating to hear that it was mandatory in order to get our ethanol up to the grade to participate in the SAF production.
When it comes to the work behind the scenes, I'm sure, at the Nebraska level, but of course at the National Corn Growers Association level, they were lobbying, I suppose, or trying to position corn and ethanol to be fit this model. What in particular were you hoping for from this announcement?
We were hoping that overall just to get, our corn and the entire Corn Belt's corn able to use for sustainable aviation fuel. Um, there's so many different practices out there. You go east, they like to work the ground. You go west, they strip till. There's guys around here that no till, they strip till. Everybody is different, and we wanted it to make it so that in order for everybody's corn to be able to be used for it, because I mean, not every practice is perfect for everybody else's operation. I know cover crops is a big thing, and you can do the CSP program through NRCS, but it's a portion of the funding in order to get cover crops going, and that's a huge investment just to get into the cover crop world. I mean, you got to buy a drill and tender, and then if the seed companies hear that it's an NRCS blend, well, they like to spike the prices a little bit higher, unfortunately.
As I read this announcement, of course, all corn, regardless of the practices, could be blended as part of into ethanol and then sustainable aviation fuel, but it would not qualify for tax credits through the Inflation Reduction Act, if I recall the language specifically. But is a thought there, Chris, that if there's not a tax incentive for those folks making SAF, they're not going to want corn that doesn't qualify for that? Is that kind of the read here?
That's kind of what I've understood, Bryce. I've kind of done a little reading onto it. Planting season, that's kind of our main priority right now. So it's on that. We got a rainstorm coming, so I'm hoping that I can sit down and go through that once it starts raining.
Is this final at this point as you understand things, or is there still a chance maybe to go back and have the Treasury tweak the language?
The way I understand it, it's final, but not everything is final until it's written on paper and signed by someone. So we're hoping that it's not final, but we just got to hope and pray that we can get this thing changed and they adopt our corn for the sustainable aviation fuel.
Ask you something about that here in a second, but just pulling some news this morning, getting comments from Senator Chuck Grassley. He had an interesting perspective, pointing out that folks in Washington D.C. perhaps not familiar with how grain is handled across the Midwest and elsewhere. He was making the point that everything gets loaded onto a semi 1,000 bushels at a time, hauled into the elevator, and then from there, of course, it gets all blended together. And he thought his perspective was, how are you going to try to track this when it comes to bringing everybody together? You sharing that same concern, Chris?
Yeah, Bryce, it's gonna be an absolute nightmare trying to keep everything lined up. What load went where. We do a pretty good job now, but sometimes bushels get transferred from this field to that field, and knowing what comes to what bin, or say you got a great big bin and you just keep piling crops on top of it, there's same moisture and all that. Well, you're not gonna know what kernels coming out of that bin go to what field. I mean, you can get a pretty darn good estimate with a scale at your facility, but it's not going to be perfect.
And finally, I believe you saw a report. I imagine you did. It was kind of circulating on Twitter. Had to do with, I believe, there were South American being imported into the United States for blending into sustainable aviation fuel. Certainly had some folks in the ethanol industry and the corn industry a bit upset about that. Do you have a chance to see that article or that headline, Chris?
Yeah, I did. Oh, what that come out last week or something like that? Brazil, or I can't remember if it was Brazil or Argentina. It's South America importing their crop, their sugarcane crop ethanol into Georgia, and it's extremely frustrating. We produce a lot of corn here, produce a lot of ethanol. Why can't we get that down to Georgia or build a plant close by that we can use this ethanol? And then the ruling that come out, it was really devastating to hear that they can't make it work unless they um, mandate doing the no-till, the cover crops, and the cut down on nitrogen, which we're hoping to cut down. It's just all of that at one time. It's going to be very hard to do.
Where do you think growers will go, like yourself, from here? Do you think you'll end up trying to add in some of those practices because of this?
I do, but we got to get everybody to do it. I'm doing the cover crops. We're cutting down on nitrogen. We do a minimum strip till. We just fracture the top half inch to inch of the ground. So I would say we're doing our pretty good start at it. It's just you got to get everybody to adopt these practices in order for it to happen.
Hmm. All right. Anything else on your mind this morning, Chris?
Nope, just hope everyone gets safely done planting and that we keep getting moisture.